He had everything, except what truly mattered, until he returned home and found a bond that would change his life forever. The taxi engine's rumble gradually diminished as the vehicle parked in front of the majestic Berkshire building. It was almost midnight in Boston, and the city seemed to breathe at a slower pace. Michael Turner rubbed his tired eyes, trying to fend off the sleep that insisted on overwhelming him after a 16-hour flight from Singapore. As he grabbed his suitcase, he left a generous tip for the driver and walked toward the entrance. "Good evening, Mr. Turner. We weren't expecting you today," commented the doorman Tony with genuine surprise. "Had to come back early, problems at the company," he responded dryly, heading for the elevator. Inside the mirrored cabin, Michael observed his own reflection. At 42, the first lines of expression were beginning to mark his face. His impeccable suit contrasted with his bloodshot, tired eyes. 30 uninterrupted hours between emergency meetings and flights. The company's servers had experienced critical failures, and he, as always, had to personally take command. When the elevator stopped on the 37th floor, Michael was already mentally planning, take a quick shower, change clothes, and head directly to the office in the Seaport district. Another night of work awaited him. That's how it had been since he founded Tech Vision, now one of the country's leading technology companies. That's also how it had been since Rebecca was no longer present. The thought about his wife brought a familiar pang in his chest, something he had learned to ignore. After all, spreadsheets, goals, and commitments didn't leave room for grief. There was no time for that when you had an empire to manage and a son to raise alone. Ethan. The boy would probably be sleeping at that hour. Michael planned to see him briefly before leaving again, perhaps just spend a few minutes by his son's bed watching him sleep, as he often did on the rare nights he came home early. He silently turned the key in the lock, trying not to make noise. Upon opening the door, however, something surprised him. A comforting aroma of chocolate hung in the air, completely unusual for that apartment, which was typically impersonal and cold, more like a hotel suite than a home. He left his suitcase in the entryway and walked down the darkened hallway. A line of light came from the kitchen, and low voices reached his ears. Voices that shouldn't be there at that hour of the night. He approached with silent steps, feeling his heart race. Not from fear, but from a disconcertion he couldn't explain. He stopped at the kitchen entrance, and the scene he witnessed left him completely paralyzed. Sarah, the cleaning lady he had hired just over 6 months ago, was kneeling beside Ethan. The boy, dressed in dinosaur pajamas, had a small scratch on his arm. She was tending to the wound with gentle, almost maternal gestures. On the counter, an open first aid kit and a tray with freshly baked cookies completed the unusually domestic scene. "There, my little one, it's nothing serious," said Sarah, with that gentle southern accent Michael had barely noticed before. "Tomorrow you won't even remember you got hurt." "But it still stings a little," complained Ethan, with a little pout that Michael immediately recognized. It was the same one Rebecca made when she wanted to convince him of something. "That's because it's healing. Look, I'll put on a special Band-Aid, one of those Dino Rex ones you like." Sarah opened a colorful little box and took out a children's bandage. "And now, how about one more chocolate cookie before going back to bed? But just one, okay? Tomorrow you have a math test and you need to be well rested." Ethan smiled, taking the offered cookie. Michael remained motionless, observing that interaction with a mixture of fascination and discomfort. It wasn't just Sarah's presence at that hour. After all, he himself had authorized her to stay with Ethan when he needed to travel. What was disconcerting was the intimacy, the naturalness with which she and the boy related to each other. "Will you read another story today?" asked Ethan while chewing the cookie. "Only if you promise to go to sleep right afterward." "I promise," replied the boy enthusiastically. Sarah helped Ethan get down from the stool and led him down the hallway in the opposite direction from where Michael was. He backed up a few steps, hiding in the shadows. He heard when they entered his son's room and the low sound of Sarah's voice beginning a story. Michael remained in the kitchen, stunned, looking around as if seeing the environment for the first time. He noticed the open notebook on the table, with school exercises corrected in neat handwriting that wasn't his. He saw Ethan's drawings stuck to the refrigerator with colorful magnets. A small plant in the window, which certainly wasn't there before his trip. Small details that, together, told a story he was completely unaware of. He approached the counter where the cookies were. He took one and tasted it. The sweet chocolate flavor brought a distant memory from childhood in Newport when his grandmother prepared something similar. How could Ethan resist this? How could he not become attached to someone who offered him not only homemade food, but also care and attention? Michael sat at the table, suddenly exhausted, but not from jet lag or hours of work. It was a different, deeper fatigue. He sat there, listening to the distant murmurs from Ethan's room, until silence once again reigned in the apartment. A few minutes later, Sarah appeared in the kitchen and almost screamed when she saw Michael sitting at the table. "Mr. Turner, you startled me," she exclaimed, putting her hand to her chest. "I didn't know you'd be back today." "I noticed," he replied, with a neutral voice that hid the storm of emotions he felt. Sarah seemed embarrassed, looking at the clock on the wall. I know it's late. Ethan had a nightmare and woke up frightened. I thought it best to stay with him until he fell asleep again." "And the cookies?" "Oh, that—" She hesitated. "It's just that doing something with his hands helps him calm down after nightmares. It always worked with my Emily when she was little." The name was familiar to Michael, although he had never paid much attention. Emily was Sarah's daughter, a teenager who lived in the South with her grandmother. Details of the cleaning lady's personal life that until then had seemed irrelevant. "How long have you been staying here during the night?" he asked, observing her carefully. "Only when you travel," she quickly replied, then hesitated. "At first, I just waited until he fell asleep and then left, but the nightmares became more frequent, and sometimes he wakes up several times in the same night." Michael nodded slowly, processing the information. "And the scratch on his arm?" "Today he fell out of bed during the nightmare, nothing serious, just a scrape." "I see," murmured Michael, though he didn't completely understand. There was something more, something he couldn't yet name. Sarah began to put away the ingredients and clean the counter, moving with the ease of someone who knew every inch of that kitchen. She seemed strangely at ease, despite her evident nervousness about the boss's unexpected presence. "Would you like me to prepare something for you to eat before I leave?" she offered finally. "That's not necessary. I just came to take a shower and change clothes. I need to get back to the office." Sarah stopped what she was doing and looked at him with an expression Michael couldn't interpret. Was it concern, or something close to disapproval? "You just got back from a trip. Wouldn't it be better to rest a bit?" The question, so simple and direct, caught Michael by surprise. No one had questioned his decisions for a long time. Not colleagues, not partners, not employees. Certainly not his cleaning lady. Before he could respond, he heard a sound coming from the hallway. Ethan was standing at the kitchen door, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Dad?" he asked, his voice groggy with sleep. "You're back?" Michael stood up, feeling a strange hesitation before approaching his son. "Yes, champ, I came back early." Ethan ran and hugged him, but the gesture, though affectionate, had something perfunctory about it, as if fulfilling an obligation. It lasted only a few seconds before the boy moved away and looked at Sarah. "I woke up again," he said, with a familiarity that made Michael feel almost like an intruder. "It's okay, honey. Your dad is home now." Sarah smiled, a gentle smile that illuminated her face with simple but harmonious features. "Let's go back to bed. You have school early tomorrow." Ethan nodded, and to Michael's surprise extended his hand to the cleaning lady, not to him. Before leaving the kitchen, he looked at his father and said, "Good night, Dad. Will you be here tomorrow?" The question contained such a fragile hope that Michael felt something break inside him. "I will, son, I promise." Ethan smiled, apparently satisfied, and left the kitchen hand in hand with Sarah. Michael watched them walk away, and when he was alone again, sat heavily in the chair. The last thing he heard before Sarah turned off the hallway light was Ethan's sleepy voice calling her Mom in an almost inaudible whisper, but one that echoed like thunder in Michael's ears. In that instant he felt a twinge in his chest, as if something fundamental and irreversible had happened in his absence, something that could no longer be undone. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. The alarm sounded punctually at 5:30 in the morning, as usual. Michael automatically extended his arm to turn it off, but something was different. It took a few seconds to realize he wasn't in yet another anonymous hotel room, but in his own bed. The events of the early morning returned to his memory, and the feeling of discomfort immediately returned. He sat on the edge of the mattress, running his hands over his face. Instinct told him to follow the usual routine: get up, shower, put on a suit, and leave for the office even before Ethan woke up. There were pending meetings, urgent decisions, an entire team waiting for his guidance to resolve the server crisis. But the image of Ethan calling Sarah Mom wouldn't leave his head. Against all his habits, Michael took his phone and sent a message to his assistant. "Isabel, rearrange my schedule. I'll be in the office only afternoon." He ignored the 3 calls that came afterward. For the first time in years, Tech Vision would have to wait. He took a long shower, dressed in casual clothes, jeans and a polo shirt, something he rarely wore, and headed to the kitchen. To his surprise, Sarah was already there preparing breakfast. She wore a simple but well-pressed uniform and had her brown hair tied in a discreet bun. "Good morning, Mr. Turner," she greeted, visibly surprised to see him awake so early and dressed so informally. "The coffee is almost ready." "Good morning, Sarah," he replied, sitting at the table. "I didn't know you arrived so early. I always come at 6:30 to prepare Ethan's breakfast and arrange his lunchbox for school," she explained, putting water to boil. "Mrs. Carmen, the former nanny, used to leave everything ready the day before, but I discovered he prefers fresh sandwiches." Michael nodded, thoughtful. Carmen had been dismissed almost a year ago, when Ethan turned 7, and Michael considered that his son was old enough not to need a full-time nanny. Since then, he had only hired a cleaning lady to keep the apartment in order. Apparently, Sarah had taken on much more responsibilities than were in her original job description. "How long have you been taking care of Ethan this way?" he asked, watching her skillfully cut fruit. Sarah hesitated a moment before answering. "Since the beginning, actually. On the first day, I noticed he came back from school hungry, so I prepared a snack. Later, I noticed he had difficulties with his Portuguese homework, and since I had been a teacher in the South before coming to Boston, I offered help." "You were a teacher?" The information caught Michael by surprise. "For 10 years, in Macon, Georgia," she confirmed with a brief smile. "I taught elementary school. I loved my work, but the salary wasn't enough to pay for my daughter's college." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps coming from the hallway. Ethan appeared at the kitchen door, already dressed in his school uniform, but with his hair still messy. He paused, seeing his father sitting at the table. "Dad, you didn't go to work?" he asked with genuine confusion. "Good morning to you too, son," replied Michael, trying to sound casual. "I decided to go in later today." Ethan looked from Michael to Sarah, as if seeking confirmation that this was actually possible. She smiled at the boy, making a gesture for him to sit at the table. "Come have your breakfast, Ethan. I made those pancakes you like." The boy's face immediately lit up. He sat at the table, still casting curious glances at his father. Sarah served the pancakes with chocolate syrup and a generous portion of cut fruit. Then she placed a cup of black coffee in front of Michael and asked if he also wanted pancakes. "Yes, please," he replied, watching with fascination the interaction between his son and the cleaning lady. Breakfast proceeded in an initially uncomfortable silence, broken only by Sarah, who asked Ethan about the day's math test and reminded him to take the Amazon rainforest project they had finished the night before. "It's due today, right?" she confirmed. "Remember that you put those jaguar photos we printed at the library?" "I remember," replied Ethan, between one forkful and another. "The teacher will love it, don't you think, Mom?" The word fell like a bomb in the middle of the kitchen. Ethan immediately realized what he had said and looked at his father with wide eyes. Sarah froze in place, holding the coffee pot in the air. I meant Sarah." Ethan quickly corrected himself, his face red with embarrassment. Michael felt his stomach sink. It wasn't a casual slip then. It was something recurrent, something the boy was used to saying when they were alone. "It's okay, son," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Finish your breakfast. We don't want to be late for school." Sarah poured more coffee into Michael's cup, avoiding his gaze. "I'm sorry, Mr. Turner. I never encouraged this, I swear. It's just that sometimes when he has nightmares—" "We can talk about this later," Michael interrupted, keeping his tone neutral despite the emotional storm he felt. The rest of breakfast proceeded in silence, with Ethan eating hurriedly, clearly anxious to escape that uncomfortable situation. When he finished, he picked up his backpack and looked hesitantly at Sarah. "Can I go with Mr. George today?" he asked. George was the driver who usually took him to school. "No," replied Michael, standing up. I'll take you today." Ethan seemed simultaneously surprised and concerned. He looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly while handing him his lunchbox. "Don't forget your sweater, Ethan. It might get colder later," she reminded him, adjusting the collar of his uniform shirt. "And good luck on the test. Remember what we studied about fractions?" "I remember." "Thank you, Sir." "Thank you," he replied, avoiding using any name. On the way to school in the luxury comfort of the Mercedes, Michael tried to make conversation several times, but Ethan responded only with monosyllables. It was like talking to a polite stranger, not his own son. "So, you really like Sarah, don't you?" he finally asked, trying a more direct subject. Ethan looked out the window before answering. "She's nice. She helps me with my homework and makes good food." "And the nightmares?" "Sarah mentioned you've been having nightmares." The boy was silent for a few moments. "Sometimes I dream about Mom," he finally said in a small voice. "That she's leaving again, and I can't reach her." Michael felt as if someone had punched him in the stomach. In 3 years since Rebecca's departure, he had never really talked to Ethan about what had happened, about how he felt, about the dreams he had. "Why did you never tell me about these nightmares?" he asked softly. Ethan shrugged, still looking out the window. "You're always busy or traveling. Simple as that. The truth, pure and crystalline, from the mouth of an 8-year-old child." They arrived at the school, a prestigious private institution in the Brookline neighborhood. Ethan unfastened his seatbelt and grabbed his backpack, apparently eager to get out of the car. "Hey, champ," Michael called, making him stop. "How about we go out for ice cream after school today? Just the two of us." Ethan stared at him, suspicious. "Don't you have to work?" "Work can wait a bit." A small smile appeared on the boy's face. "Can we go to Delicious Ice Cream? They have the pistachio ice cream I like." "Of course," agreed Michael, surprised. He had no idea his son liked pistachio ice cream. "I'll pick you up at 3:30 then." Ethan nodded and got out of the car. Upon reaching the school gate, he briefly hugged his father, a polite hug, almost formal. Michael watched his son walk away, blending into the crowd of children, and felt a tightness in his chest. Who was this 8-year-old boy he barely knew? Back at the apartment, he found Sarah tidying Ethan's room. She seemed tense, probably expecting a difficult conversation about the breakfast incident. "We need to talk," said Michael, stopping at the door. Sarah nodded, putting the last toy in the organizer box. "I understand if you want me to look for another job," she said with dignity. "I never intended to cross boundaries." "It's not that," replied Michael, making a gesture for her to follow him to the living room. They sat down, he on the sofa and she in the armchair, maintaining a respectful distance. "I want to understand what happened in the last few months, how we got to this point." Sarah sighed, folding her hands on her lap. "It started with the nightmares, as I said. Ethan would wake up crying, calling for his mother. At first I would just calm him down and go back to my room, but he was so afraid of being alone that I started staying with him until he fell asleep again." "And when did this evolve into him calling you Mom?" She lowered her eyes, visibly uncomfortable. "It was after a strong storm about 3 months ago. Lightning struck near the building, and the power went out. He was terrified, clung to me and cried a lot, saying he wanted his mum. I hugged him and said it was okay that I was there. I think in his mind, at that moment of fear, I became the maternal figure he so desperately needed." Michael closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of that revelation. "And you didn't think you should tell me this?" "I tried, Mr. Turner. I left messages, sent texts, saying we needed to talk about Ethan. But you were always busy in meetings, traveling, and when you came back you spent so little time at home." It was true. Michael rarely checked personal messages when he was absorbed in work, and the brief moments he spent at home were usually when Ethan was already asleep. "I should have noticed," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Ethan is a wonderful boy," continued Sarah, with an evident affection in her voice. "So intelligent, so sensitive. He just needs attention, to know he has someone he can count on." "And that person has been you, not me," concluded Michael, with a pang of guilt and jealousy mixed together. Sarah didn't answer, but her silence was eloquent enough. "You mentioned you have a daughter," said Michael, slightly changing the subject. "Emily, right? You said she's in college." "Trying to get in," corrected Sarah. "She's 17 years old and in her last year of high school in Macon. She lives with my mother since I came to work in Boston. She's a hard-working girl, works part-time at a pharmacy, and studies at night. She dreams of becoming a doctor. Must be hard to be away from her. It's the price we pay, replied Sarah, with a resignation that seemed to come from years of sacrifices. Here I can earn a better salary to send to them. In Georgia, with what I earned as a teacher, it barely covered the basic expenses. Michael observed her with new eyes. She wasn't just a cleaning lady who had taken liberties with his son. She was a woman who had abandoned her own career and separated from her daughter to provide a better future for her. Someone who understood sacrifices as much as he did. Why did you never mention you were a teacher when you applied for the job? He asked, genuinely curious. Sarah gave a sad smile. Who would hire a former teacher as a cleaning lady, Mr. Turner? They would think I wouldn't stay in the job, that I was too proud for the service. I really needed the work. Michael nodded, understanding the logic. And how long do you plan to stay in Boston? Away from your daughter? Until she finishes college, if she gets in. Another 6-7 years, maybe. Sarah looked at her own hands, calloused from work. We do what we need to for our children, don't we? The question hung in the air, loaded with meanings that Michael couldn't ignore. After all, what was he doing for his own son? Building an empire that Ethan would inherit one day, certainly, but at what cost? At that moment, Michael made a decision that would change the course of all their lives. He didn't yet know exactly how, but something needed to change. And the first thing would be to pick up Ethan from school, take him for pistachio ice cream, and really talk to him, really listen to him. In the weeks that followed, the apartment in the Berkshire building witnessed subtle but significant changes. The most evident was Michael's constant presence. For the first time in years, he began to arrive home at dinner time and spend entire weekends with Ethan. The CEO of TechVision had reorganized his schedule, delegated responsibilities and, to the shock of his partners, begun to refuse non-essential international trips. Another change was the relationship between Michael and Sarah. No longer just employer and employee, they now shared the responsibility of caring for Ethan. The transition wasn't easy. There were moments of discomfort, undefined territories, and some discussions about boundaries. But gradually they found a balance that worked for everyone. On a sunny Friday, Michael arrived home earlier than usual. He found Ethan and Sarah on the balcony, absorbed in a science experiment for the school's science fair. Test tubes, baking soda, and a miniature volcano occupied the table. "Is this really going to explode?" asked Ethan, his eyes shining with anticipation. "It's not exactly an explosion," explained Sarah patiently. "It's a chemical reaction. When we mix vinegar with baking soda, they react and form carbon dioxide, which is a gas. It's the gas that makes it look like the volcano is erupting," Michael observed, leaning on the doorframe, fascinated not just by the experiment, but by the enthusiasm with which Sarah explained the scientific concepts. He remembered that she had been a teacher, and apparently a very good one. "Dad!" exclaimed Ethan when he noticed him. "Come see our volcano. Sarah said we can add red food coloring to make it look like real lava." "I'm seeing," replied Michael, approaching. "It looks amazing. When is the science fair?" "Next week on Thursday," replied Ethan. "Will you be able to go?" The question contained a cautious hope, as if the boy feared the answer. Michael felt a pang in his chest as he realized that his son still doubted his presence, even after weeks of consistent effort. "Of course I will," he assured, messing up Ethan's hair. "It's already marked on my calendar. Nothing will stop me from seeing this volcano erupt." The smile he received in return was worth more than any $1 million contract he had ever closed. After dinner, when Ethan was already in bed, Michael found Sarah in the kitchen, organizing the lunchbox for the next day. He noticed that she seemed tired, with visible dark circles under her usually bright eyes. "Is everything okay?" he asked, pouring himself a glass of water. Sarah hesitated before answering. "Just worried about Emily. She hasn't been feeling well, but insists on continuing to work and study at the same pace." "Anything serious?" "Anemia. The doctor recommended better nutrition and supplements, but—" She didn't complete the sentence, just shrugged in a gesture that said a lot about her financial limitations. Michael nodded, thoughtful. In recent days, he had been reflecting a lot on privileges and opportunities, on how his own life had been facilitated by the quality education he had received, by the initial capital he had inherited from his father to open his first business. It contrasted with the reality of people like Sarah, who worked twice as hard just to offer the basics to their children. "Sarah, have you ever wondered why I never increased your salary since you took on the extra responsibilities with Ethan?" he suddenly asked. She seemed disconcerted by the question. "Well, you've been giving me occasional bonuses." "It's not enough," he interrupted. "You've been doing the work of a nanny, housekeeper, tutor, and in many ways substitute mother. You deserve to be adequately compensated." "I don't do it for money," she replied with dignity. "I like Ethan. I care about him." "I know," assured Michael. "And that's exactly why I want to do something more significant, something that helps not just you but also your daughter." In the following days, Michael discreetly worked on a plan. He used his contacts to obtain information about the best medical universities in Boston. He consulted lawyers about how to structure a private scholarship program. He spoke with the board of TechVision about expanding the company's social responsibility initiatives. A week later, he came home with a folder full of documents. He found Sarah helping Ethan with his math homework at the living room table. "Ethan, can you excuse us for a minute? I need to talk to Sarah about something important," he asked, trying not to sound excessively serious so as not to alarm his son. The boy looked suspicious but obeyed, heading to his room with a last curious look over his shoulder. "Did something happen, Mr. Turner?" asked Sarah, visibly concerned. "Michael," he corrected her for the umpteenth time. Despite weeks of closer coexistence, she still hesitated to call him by his first name. "And yes, something happened. Something good, I hope." He opened the folder on the table and explained his plan. A full scholarship for Emily at one of the best private medical universities in Boston, with everything included: housing, transportation, teaching materials, even a small allowance for personal expenses. The scholarship would be officially granted by the TechVision Foundation, he explained. "But in truth, I would personally fund all costs. Emily could come to Boston, live with you, and you both would stay in the guest apartment here in the building until we find something more suitable." Sarah listened to everything in silence, her eyes gradually filling with tears. When Michael finished, she shook her head in denial. "I can't accept something like this," she said with a choked voice. It's too much." "It's not charity, if that's what you're thinking," Michael hastened. "Consider it an investment. Emily seems to be a brilliant and determined young woman. The world needs doctors like that, and frankly, you've already done more for Ethan and for me than I'll ever be able to repay. But this amount—" She looked at the numbers in the attached budget. "It must be a fortune." "For me, it isn't," he replied honestly. "And even if it were, it would be well spent. Think about it, Sarah. Think about your daughter's future." After long conversations, including several video calls with Emily and the grandmother in Macon, the agreement was sealed. Emily would come to Boston the following month after completing high school and would start an intensive preparatory course for the medical school entrance exams. The news was received with enthusiasm by Ethan, who immediately began referring to Emily as his older sister, although they had never met in person. For the boy, raised as an only child, the idea of having someone like a sister was fascinating. The guest apartment in the same building, 2 floors below, was prepared to receive Sarah and Emily. Michael insisted on furnishing the space completely, including a comfortable office where Emily could study. He also hired a cleaning lady to take care of the main apartment in Sarah's absence. As the date of Emily's arrival approached, Sarah alternated between overflowing gratitude and concern with practical details. One night, while folding freshly washed clothes, she expressed her biggest fear. "What if she doesn't adapt here? Emily has always lived in a small town. Boston can be intimidating." "She'll have you," replied Michael, helping to organize Ethan's clothes, an activity he would never have imagined doing a few months ago. "And we'll also be here to support her." Sarah looked at him with an expression Michael couldn't completely decipher. There was gratitude, certainly, but also something deeper, more complex. "Why are you doing all this, Michael?" she asked, finally using his first name. The question caught him off guard. Why was he doing that? The easy answer would be to say it was gratitude for what she had done for Ethan, or that it was a form of fair compensation for the work she performed, but there was more. "I think I'm trying to be a better person," he replied, after a few moments of reflection. "Since Rebecca left, I became someone obsessed with work. with building something material, tangible. I forgot what really matters." He paused, organizing his thoughts. "Seeing you with Ethan made me realize how much time I've lost, how many moments I've let pass, how I was failing as a father. And now I want to fix that. I want to create an environment where Ethan can grow up happy, surrounded by people who care about him, and you and Emily are part of that." Sarah nodded slowly, accepting the answer. "Thank you for being honest." On the day of Emily's arrival, the apartment was in a buzz. Ethan had insisted on making a welcome sign, and Sarah had prepared typical southern dishes to receive her daughter. Michael, in turn, was strangely nervous. He felt as if he were about to meet not just his employee's daughter, but someone who would become an important part of their lives. The company car that had gone to pick up Emily at the airport arrived punctually at 4 in the afternoon. Sarah waited anxiously in the building's hall, accompanied by Michael and Ethan. When the elevator doors opened, revealing a 17-year-old girl, tall and slender like her mother, with the same expressive eyes, Sarah couldn't contain her tears. The embrace between mother and daughter was long and emotional. Emily was also crying, but smiling at the same time, clearly happy to reunite with her mother after months of separation. "My daughter," murmured Sarah, holding Emily's face between her hands. "How beautiful you are." After the emotional reunion, Emily turned to Michael and Ethan, who were observing the scene with contained smiles. "Thank you very much for everything you're doing for us, Mr. Turner," she said, extending her hand with surprising maturity for her age. "Michael, please," he replied, shaking her hand, "and there's no need to thank me. Your mother has been a blessing to our family." Ethan, who had been holding the sign with some shyness, finally stepped forward. "I made this for you," he said, handing over the colorful sign that read, "Welcome, Emily, my new sister." The young woman crouched to be at the boy's height and examined the sign with a genuine smile. "It's beautiful, Ethan, thank you. You know, I've always wanted a little brother." The comment made Ethan's face light up. Without hesitation, he hugged Emily, who returned with the same spontaneity. Observing the scene, Michael felt something warm and comforting expand in his chest. It was a sensation he hadn't experienced for a long time, that of belonging, of being exactly where he should be. In the days that followed, Emily integrated into the household routine with surprising ease. Intelligent and dedicated, she divided her time between the preparatory course and the apartment, where she often helped Ethan with his school tasks. The boy adored her, following her like a shadow whenever possible. One night, after Ethan was already asleep, Michael found Emily on the balcony, looking at the illuminated city. She had an open biology book on her lap, but seemed lost in thought. "Studying late?" he asked, approaching. Emily smiled. "Anatomy, it's fascinating, but there's so much to memorize. Are you enjoying the preparatory course?" "Very much," she replied with genuine enthusiasm. "The teachers are excellent, and the material is comprehensive. I'm sure I'll be well prepared for the entrance exams." They talked for almost an hour about Emily's plans for the future, her aspirations as a doctor, the challenges she would face. Michael was impressed with the young woman's maturity and determination. "You know," she said, as the conversation was coming to an end, "my mom always believed I could get into medical school even when it seemed impossible. She gave up so much for me." "She's an incredible woman," agreed Michael. "Yes, she is." Emily paused, as if choosing her next words carefully. "And you're also an incredible person, Michael. What you're doing for us, I have no words to thank you." "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do," she insisted, "and I want you to know that I see how you look at my mom." Michael felt his face heat up, caught by surprise at the direct observation. "What do you mean?" Emily smiled, with a wisdom beyond her years. "With admiration, respect, and something more that perhaps you yourself haven't fully realized yet." Before Michael could respond, Sarah appeared at the balcony door, interrupting the conversation. "It's getting late, Emily. You have class early tomorrow." "I'm coming, Mom," replied the young woman, closing the book. She cast one last meaningful look at Michael before leaving. Alone on the balcony, Michael reflected on Emily's words. Was it possible that his feelings for Sarah were so transparent? And more importantly, what feelings were those exactly? There was no doubt that he admired Sarah, her dedication, her intelligence, her ability to care for others. He also couldn't deny that in recent weeks, He had been noticing details about her that previously went unnoticed. The way her eyes lit up when she laughed, the simple elegance of her gestures, the quiet strength that emanated from her. But from there to considering something deeper, would it be appropriate, possible, desirable? Michael didn't have answers to these questions, only the growing certainty that something was changing inside him, and that, whatever the outcome, his life would never be the same again. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. Autumn arrived in Boston, bringing shorter days and cooler nights. On the streets of the Seaport District, dry leaves danced with the breeze, forming small, colorful whirlwinds. And in the apartment of the Berkshire Building, the routine had transformed into something Michael had never imagined possible. The mornings began with family breakfast. Not a conventional family, certainly, but one that worked in its own peculiar logic. Ethan now woke up excited to go to school, eager to tell Emily the news during the journey, since she often accompanied him to school before heading to her preparatory course. Sarah continued preparing delicious meals, but now as part of the family, not as an employee. And Michael, surprisingly, found himself appreciating these domestic moments that he would previously consider mundane. On a particularly cold Tuesday in April, Michael received a call from the principal of Ethan's school, requesting an urgent meeting. Concerned, he reorganized his schedule and headed to the institution immediately. "Mr. Turner, thank you for coming so promptly," greeted Principal Elisa, a middle-aged woman with a serene expression. "I wanted to talk about Ethan." "Did something happen?" he asked, tense. "Actually, yes, but nothing negative," she hastened to clarify, noticing his concern. "On the contrary, Ethan has shown extraordinary improvement in recent months. His grades have gone up, his participation in class has increased, and the episodes of introversion that concerned us have decreased considerably." Michael visibly relaxed. "That's great." "It's exceptional," corrected the principal. "We rarely see such a significant transformation in such a short time, and we wanted to understand what changed in his life so we could support this progress." The question made Michael reflect. What had changed? Everything, actually. His own presence in his son's life, to start with, the welcoming environment that Sarah had created, Emily's arrival, who had become a kind of older sister to Ethan, the sense of belonging that they all now shared. "I think we've found a better balance at home," he finally replied. "Ethan is more happy." The principal nodded, satisfied. "Last week, we asked the students to draw their families for an art project. Would you like to see Ethan's drawing?" She opened a folder and removed a sheet of colored paper. The drawing, made with markers and colored pencils, showed 5 figures in front of a tall building that certainly represented the Berkshire Building. Michael immediately recognized himself, Ethan, Sarah, and Emily. But there was a 5th person in the drawing, a woman with long hair and a yellow dress, drawn a bit above the others, as if floating. "Rebecca," he murmured, feeling a lump in his throat. "Ethan explained that this is his mother, who now lives in the stars, as he said," commented the principal softly. "But what caught our attention was how he described you all." She turned the paper, showing the back where Ethan had written, in his childish handwriting, a caption. "My family. Daddy Michael, Mommy Sarah, Sister Emily, me and Mommy Rebecca, who takes care of us from above." Michael felt a wave of contradictory emotions: surprise, confusion, a hint of guilt for seeing Rebecca replaced, and at the same time, gratitude that Ethan had found a new emotional balance. "I understand that your family configuration may be unconventional," said the principal, choosing her words carefully. "But the important thing is that it's working for Ethan. He's more emotionally secure, more confident, and this is reflected in his school performance." "Yes, it's working," agreed Michael, still absorbing the impact of the drawing. Can I keep this?" "Of course," she replied, handing him the paper. "In fact, that was the main reason for the meeting. We wanted you to know how Ethan is feeling, and to congratulate you on the positive changes you've implemented at home." Upon leaving the school, Michael remained for a few minutes in the car, looking at the drawing. Mommy Sarah. The naturalness with which Ethan had made this association surprised him. It shouldn't, of course. The boy had been calling Sarah Mom for months, although he usually quickly corrected himself in Michael's presence. But now it was different. It wasn't a lapse, a momentary emotional slip. It was a conscious, thought-out declaration. Ethan considered Sarah his mother, not as a replacement for Rebecca, but as a second maternal figure in his life. And how did Michael feel about this? The answer wasn't simple. There was a part of him that still clung to Rebecca's memory, to the idea that she was the only mother Ethan should have. But there was also a new understanding emerging, that love wasn't a limited resource, that Ethan wasn't betraying his biological mother's memory by finding maternal comfort in Sarah. Driving back to Tech Vision, Michael made a decision. It was time for an honest conversation with Sarah about the future. Their future as a family. The word still sounded strange in his mind, loaded with implications that he wasn't sure he was ready to face. That night, during dinner, he observed the interaction between Ethan, Sarah, and Emily. The way they talked, laughed together, shared stories of the day. It was a natural, organic dynamic that couldn't be forced or fabricated. It was real. After Ethan went to bed, Michael invited Sarah for a conversation on the balcony. Boston's starry sky stretched above them, the city lights creating an almost magical setting. "I had a meeting with the school principal today," he began, not knowing exactly how to approach the subject. "Did something happen with Ethan?" asked Sarah, immediately concerned. "Only good things," he assured, and told her about the conversation with the principal, culminating in the drawing Ethan had made. Sarah listened in silence, her eyes fixed on the city lights. When he finished, she sighed deeply. "I'm sorry, Michael. I never wanted to take Rebecca's place." "That's not what's happening," he replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "Ethan isn't replacing Rebecca. He included her in the drawing above all of us, protecting us. She will always be his mother." "But he called me Mommy Sarah." The emotion was palpable in her voice. "Because that's what you've been to him," affirmed Michael gently. "A mother, in all the ways that matter. You love him, care for him, teach him, protect him. Why wouldn't he call you that?" Sarah finally looked at him, her eyes bright with contained tears. "And how do you feel about that?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken meanings. It wasn't just about how Michael felt about Ethan calling Sarah Mum. It was about how he felt about her, about the new family configuration they had created, almost without realizing it. "I feel—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "Grateful, relieved, and something more that I'm still trying to understand." The conversation was interrupted by Michael's cell phone. It was an emergency call from work. An important client in Asia was facing critical problems with the system, and his intervention was necessary. Apologizing to Sarah, he answered the call, silently promising that they would resume that essential conversation later. But later turned into days, then into weeks, as Tech Vision faced one crisis after another. Work, which Michael had managed to balance so well in recent months, returned to consuming excessive hours of his day. The difference now was that he made a conscious effort to be present at meals and important moments, such as Ethan's science fair and Emily's practice tests. Amid this whirlwind, something unexpected happened. During a charity event organized by Tech Vision, Michael brought Sarah, Ethan, and Emily as his guests. It was an elegant dinner at one of the most luxurious hotels in the city, with the presence of executives, politicians, and important figures of Boston society. Sarah seemed uncomfortable initially, wearing a simple but elegant dress that Emily had convinced her to buy especially for the occasion. Her natural beauty, enhanced by discreet makeup and loose hair, attracted admiring looks from several guests. During the cocktail party, a well-known socialite approached Michael, who was talking with a group of businessmen. With a malicious smile, she commented, loud enough for several around to hear, "So, Michael, when are you going to officially introduce us to your new wife? Everyone is commenting about how you showed up with her and the children. A beautiful family, I must say." The comment provoked a momentary silence in the group. Michael felt his face heat up, not from embarrassment, but from indignation at the way the woman had referred to Sarah, as if she were a trophy to be displayed, not a person with her own dignity. "Mrs. Wilson, let me correct some misconceptions," he replied, keeping his voice calm but firm. "Sarah is not my wife. She's an extraordinary woman, who takes care of my son with a love I can't express in words. Emily is her daughter, a brilliant young woman who earned a full scholarship in medicine through her own merit. And yes, we form a family, although not the type that society columns usually understand." The response left the socialite visibly uncomfortable. She murmured some excuse and quickly moved away. The other guests resumed their conversations, but Michael noticed the curious looks that continued to be cast in his and Sarah's direction. Later, during dinner, Michael noticed that Sarah seemed restless, moving the food around on her plate without really eating. "Is everything okay?" he asked quietly. "Yes, just tired," she replied, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But Michael knew Sarah too well now to believe that superficial response. There was something more, something she wasn't saying. The answer came the next morning, when he found Sarah in the kitchen preparing coffee as usual, but with a serious expression that didn't match the sunny atmosphere of that Sunday morning. "Michael, we need to talk," she said, as soon as Ethan left the kitchen to get something from his room. The tone of her voice made Michael's heart tighten. "Of course. What happened?" Sarah sat at the table, joining her hands on the wooden top, in a gesture that he recognized as a sign of nervousness. "I received a job offer," she began, avoiding his gaze, "in Chicago to work as a housekeeper in a home in Lake Forest. The salary is significantly higher than what I receive here. It includes housing, health insurance, even a subsidy for studies." The news hit Michael like a punch to the stomach. You're considering accepting?" "I don't know," she answered honestly. "It's an incredible opportunity from a financial point of view, but—" She hesitated. "But," Michael encouraged, trying to control the anxiety in his voice, "but it would mean leaving all this behind. Ethan, who has already suffered so much with losses, Emily, who is adapting so well here, and—" She finally looked at him. "And you?" The silence that followed was loaded with unspoken words, feelings not completely expressed. "Is it because of what happened last night?" asked Michael, suddenly understanding. "That woman's comment?" Sarah nodded slowly. "In part. But it's not just that. It's the way some people look at me when we're together in public. As if I were opportunistic, as if I were trying to hook the rich boss." She gave a humorless laugh. "As if everything we've built here were just a modern version of Cinderella." "Since when do you care what others think?" asked Michael, genuinely surprised. Sarah had always seemed so secure to him, so centered on her own values. "I don't care for myself," she clarified. "I care for Ethan, for the image he will have of your family. And I also worry about your reputation. I know how much tech vision means to you." Michael felt a wave of indignation grow inside him. It was absurd that Sarah felt she needed to distance herself to protect his reputation or Ethan's. "Sarah, look at me," he asked, waiting until she raised her eyes. "I don't care what Mrs. Wilson or anyone else thinks about us. What we've built here is real. It's sincere. Ethan is happier than he's ever been since he lost his mother. Emily is flourishing. And I—" He hesitated, feeling he was on the edge of an emotional precipice. "I don't know exactly what's happening between us, but I know I don't want you to leave." Before Sarah could respond, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Ethan was returning, followed by Emily, who had slept in the main apartment the night before after they all returned late from the event. The conversation was postponed once again, but the tension remained in the air, palpable like the fine mist that sometimes covered Boston on autumn mornings. In the weeks that followed, the job offer in Chicago hung over them like a shadow. Sarah didn't directly touch on the subject again, but Michael caught her several times with a thoughtful expression, lost in considerations she didn't share. Emily, in turn, was vehemently against the move. "Mom, it doesn't make sense. I just got settled here. I'm preparing for the entrance exams. How am I going to move to Chicago now?" "You could stay, dear," Sarah argued. "We've already talked about this. The apartment would remain available for you, and I would come visit whenever possible." But the young woman wasn't convinced. One night, she sought out Michael in his office, with the determined expression of someone who had made an important decision. "She's thinking of accepting, isn't she?" she asked directly. Michael sighed, closing his laptop. "I think so. She sees this as an opportunity she can't refuse." "But she doesn't need to go. You've already offered everything she could want here. A good salary, an apartment, my education guaranteed." "Maybe it's not just a question of money or material comfort," suggested Michael, verbalizing a thought that had been growing in his mind. "Maybe it's about dignity, about how she sees herself and how she thinks others see her." Emily frowned, processing the idea, because she still feels like an employee, even after everything. Yes, agreed Michael. And because in a way the dynamic between us has never been completely defined. Are we a family? Are we employer and employee who developed a friendship? What exactly are we, Emily? The young woman studied him for a moment, with an insight that very much resembled her mother's. I think the real question is, what do you want them to be? The question hung in the air, demanding an answer that Michael wasn't yet fully ready to formulate. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. Winter arrived in Boston, bringing colder mornings and nights that required extra blankets. In the city known for its mild climate, that season of intense cold was commented on by everyone as exceptional. To Michael, the weather seemed to perfectly reflect the atmosphere that had taken over the apartment in recent weeks. A subtle but persistent coolness had settled in the spaces previously filled with laughter and relaxed conversations. Sarah still hadn't given a definitive answer about the job offer in Chicago, but her increasingly prolonged silence said a lot. She continued fulfilling her functions with the same dedication as always, preparing meals, helping Ethan with his tasks, keeping the house in order. But something had changed. An invisible barrier seemed to have been erected between her and Michael, as if both feared initiating a conversation that could change everything. On a particularly cold Friday, Michael decided to leave the office earlier. Tech Vision had finally overcome the crisis with the international servers, and he felt he deserved a few hours of rest. Besides, he wanted to spend time with Ethan. The boy had been especially quiet lately, as if sensing that something important was about to change. Upon arriving home, he found the apartment silent. He left his jacket on the sofa and followed down the hallway, hearing low voices coming from Ethan's room. The door was ajar, allowing him to see his son sitting on the bed, hugging an old teddy bear he rarely used anymore, while Sarah sat beside him, gently running her hand through the boy's hair. "But why do you have to go away?" Ethan was asking, his voice choked. Michael froze where he stood. His heart raced, beating painfully against his ribs. "I haven't decided yet, honey," replied Sarah gently. "I'm just considering the possibility. Is it because I did something wrong?" The question was so loaded with insecurity that Michael felt a knot form in his throat. "No," exclaimed Sarah, hugging the boy tightly. "Never think that. You're perfect just as you are. This has nothing to do with you." "Then why? I thought you liked living here with us." Sarah sighed, seeking words that an 8-year-old child could understand. "I do, Ethan. Very much. But sometimes adults need to make difficult decisions thinking about the future." "What future could be better than staying with the people you love?" asked the boy with the simple and direct logic of childhood. The question seemed to deeply affect Sarah. She was silent for a long moment before answering. "None," she finally admitted, her voice almost inaudible. "No future can be better than this." "Then why are you thinking about leaving?" Again, silence. Michael could see that Sarah was struggling with words, trying to explain emotional complexities that she herself hadn't completely resolved. "Sometimes, Ethan, adults are afraid," she confessed finally. "Afraid of getting hurt, afraid that good things will end, afraid of wanting something they might not be able to have." "You're afraid?" asked Ethan, clearly surprised. For him, Sarah had always been a rock of stability, someone who feared nothing. "Yes," she admitted with a sad smile, "I'm afraid. But you always tell me that we shouldn't let fear decide things for us," reminded the boy. "You say we have to be brave, even when we're scared." Sarah laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're using my own words against me, smarty." "Because they're good words," replied Ethan seriously. "And you're good with words, and with hugs, and with pancakes." He paused, looking at her with pleading eyes. "Please, don't go away." Michael saw silent tears run down Sarah's face as she hugged Ethan again. He silently backed away down the hallway, feeling like an intruder in such an intimate and painful moment. In the living room, he sat heavily on the sofa, his mind full of conflicting thoughts. Sarah's words to Ethan echoed in his head, afraid of wanting something they might not be able to have. What exactly did she fear not being able to have? A definitive place in their lives, a deeper relationship with Michael, social respect in a world that insisted on seeing her only as the employee. He realized with sudden clarity that the problem had never been the job offer itself, The offer had just brought to the surface questions that both had been avoiding for months. Questions about what they really felt for each other, about the kind of family they were building, about the future they wanted to share, and the big question, why he, Michael Turner, who faced without hesitation million-dollar negotiations, aggressive investors, and fierce competitors, was so terrified by the idea of being honest about his feelings. His thoughts were interrupted by soft footsteps. Sarah entered the living room, her eyes still red, but her composure recovered. Ethan ended up falling asleep, she informed, maintaining a professional tone that sounded painfully forced. I think the day was tiring at school. They had physical education and then a science test. Sarah, called Michael, ignoring the trivial comment. We need to talk. She nodded, sitting in the armchair opposite the sofa, maintaining a distance that seemed symbolic of everything that was wrong between them. You've already decided, haven't you? He asked directly. About Chicago. Sarah avoided his gaze, fixing on her own hands. I'm inclined to accept, she replied after a moment. It's an opportunity I can't ignore, even if it means leaving Ethan devastated. The question came out harsher than he intended, and he immediately regretted the accusatory tone. Sarah's eyes rose, hurt, but determined. It's not fair to use Ethan as an argument, Michael. He'll get over it. Children are resilient. And Emily? She made it clear she doesn't want to move. Emily can stay, as we discussed. She's almost ready for the entrance exams, has the support of the scholarship, and has already demonstrated enough maturity to manage her own life. Michael felt the frustration grow. She had a rational answer for everything, a well-elaborated justification for each obstacle he presented. And yet something in her posture, in her evasive look, said there was more, much more, than she was expressing. And what about us? He finally asked, addressing the elephant in the room. Is that also something you're willing to leave behind? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Sarah closed her eyes for an instant, as if seeking strength. What us, Michael? She asked, with a soft but firm voice. A boss and his employee who developed a friendship? A man who generously helped his maid's daughter? What us exactly are you mentioning? The question hit Michael like a slap. It was exactly what he had been avoiding defining, what he had been pushing to an obscure corner of his mind, while he occupied himself with crises at the company and everyday issues. You know it's more than that, he replied, feeling strangely vulnerable. Much more. Do I? Her voice trembled slightly. Because we've never talked about this, Michael. We've never defined what's happening between us. And meanwhile, the world out there doesn't hesitate to define it for us. I'm the maid who hit the jackpot, the opportunist who seduced the rich and vulnerable boss. Since when do you care what others think? He countered, repeating the question he had asked weeks ago. Since it affects my dignity, since I saw how some people looked at me at that charity event as if I were an intruder, a fraud, she replied, emotion finally breaking her careful composure. And the worst is that sometimes I feel exactly like that, as if I were living a life that doesn't belong to me, occupying a place I have no right to. That's absurd, protested Michael, standing up and walking toward her. You have as much right to this life as anyone. You earned everything you have with your own merit, your own work. Did I really? She questioned, looking him directly in the eyes. Or was it you who provided everything? The apartment, Emily's education, the social status I never had access to before. And what happens if one day you decide you don't want me around anymore? Do I go back to being just the cleaning lady, discarded like an item that lost its usefulness? Her words hit him deeply. He had never considered how his generosity could be interpreted as control, how the economic power difference between them created a fundamental imbalance in the relationship. I never thought of you that way, he affirmed, sitting beside her. Never. I know, replied Sarah, softening her tone. You're a good man, Michael. Generous, sincere. It's one of the reasons why I... She hesitated, the words dying on her lips. Why you... he encouraged, his heart racing again. Sarah shook her head, as if brushing away an untimely thought. Nothing, it doesn't matter. What matters is that I need to follow my own path, build something that is truly mine. In Chicago, I'll be hired for my own merit, for my professional skills. I won't be the businessman's protégé, but just Sarah Miller, competent housekeeper." "And is that what you want?" asked Michael, unable to hide the pain in his voice. "A life where you're just valued for your professional skills? Where Ethan doesn't have you to help him with nightmares? Where Emily is hundreds of miles away? Where I—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "Where I can't see you every day?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears again. "It's not what I want," she admitted, her voice almost inaudible. "It's what I think I need to do." "Why?" "Because I'm afraid," she exclaimed, finally letting the tears fall freely. "I'm afraid of getting even more attached to you all and then losing everything. I'm afraid that one day you'll meet someone from your world, someone suitable, and realize you don't want me in your life anymore. I'm afraid that Ethan will grow up and resent me for not being his real mother. I'm afraid I'm living a dream that will inevitably end." Her confession, so raw and honest, left Michael speechless for a moment. It was as if he finally saw all the insecurities and doubts she had hidden for so long under a facade of competence and tranquility. "I'm afraid too," he confessed after a moment. "Afraid of opening my heart again and being devastated as I was when I lost Rebecca. Afraid of not being the father Ethan deserves. Afraid that you'll realize you can have someone much better than a workaholic, obsessed man who barely knew the name of his own son's teacher a few months ago." A small smile appeared on Sarah's face, despite the tears. "Teacher Cecilia. She's been teaching for 12 years and loves children's literature. See, that's why we need you," he replied, risking a smile too. "You know these important details that I didn't even know existed." The moment of lightness didn't last long. Sarah wiped away the tears with the backs of her hands, regaining her composure. "I don't want to leave," she admitted in a low voice. "But I also can't continue in this limbo, Michael. It's not healthy for any of us." He nodded, finally understanding the depth of the problem. It wasn't just about the job offer, or about the malicious comments from society. It was about defining what they were, what they wanted to be, what they could build together. "Give me a few days," he asked, gently holding her hands. "A few days to put my thoughts in order, to find a solution that works for all of us." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "All right. But I can't wait forever, Michael. The offer has a deadline, and I need to give an answer by the end of the month." "I understand, and you'll have an answer, not about the offer, but about us, about the future." She stood up, smoothing her simple dress with a nervous gesture. "I'll prepare dinner. Emily should be arriving from her course." Michael watched her leave the room, feeling simultaneously exhausted and strangely energized. The conversation had been painful, but necessary. For the first time in weeks, he felt that perhaps there was a path forward, even if he couldn't yet see it clearly. That night, dinner proceeded in an uncomfortable silence. Ethan, usually talkative, seemed introspective, casting anxious glances between Sarah and Michael. Emily, in turn, clearly perceived the tension but chose not to comment, maintaining a superficial conversation about her day at the preparatory course. After dinner, when Ethan was already in bed and Emily had returned to the apartment downstairs, Michael retired to his office. Seated in front of the computer, he began to research houses for sale in Boston, not luxurious apartments downtown, but houses with gardens in quiet neighborhoods like Brookline or Cambridge, where Ethan could have space to play, maybe even with a dog. He wasn't sure if that was the answer he was looking for, but something inside him said that a new beginning, in a place that was truly theirs, not just his, but theirs as a family, could be a step in the right direction. In the early morning, he was awakened by screams coming from Ethan's room. He immediately got up, running down the hallway. Upon reaching his son's bedroom door, he found Sarah already there, hugging the boy who was trembling, bathed in sweat. "Nightmare?" asked Michael, concerned. Sarah nodded, continuing to gently rock Ethan. "One of the worst in months." "Don't let my mom leave," sobbed Ethan, clinging to Sarah with desperation. "Please, don't let her go." The phrase, so simple and direct, hit Michael like lightning. There was no confusion, no slip. Ethan knew exactly what he was saying, knew exactly who he was calling Mom. "It's okay, my love," murmured Sarah, rocking him. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes met Michael's over the boy's head, conveying a silent question. He nodded gently, feeling a certainty grow in his chest, the certainty that he would do anything to prevent that scene from repeating, to prevent Ethan from feeling again the fear of losing someone he loved. When Ethan finally went back to sleep, Michael and Sarah silently left the room. In the darkened hallway, he gently held her arm. "You told him you're not going anywhere," he commented in a low voice. "I know," she replied with a tired sigh. "I couldn't help it. Seeing him like that." "It was the right thing to say," affirmed Michael with surprising conviction. "Because you're not going anywhere, Sarah. None of us is." She stared at him in the dimness, her eyes shining with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I finally understood what matters," he replied, feeling the words flow naturally. "And it's not keeping up appearances, or worrying about what others think, or even building a technological empire. It's this: you, Ethan, Emily. Our family, however unconventional it may be." "Michael," she began, but he gently placed a finger on her lips. "Not now," he asked. "It's late. We're all exhausted. But tomorrow I want to show you something I've been thinking about. And then we can really talk about the future. Our future." Sarah nodded, her eyes still fixed on his, as if trying to read the truth behind the words. Finally, with a small smile, she moved away toward her room. Michael remained in the hallway for a long moment, watching the closed door of Ethan's room. "Don't let my mom leave," the boy had pleaded. And at that moment, under the faint light of the moon that came through the hallway window, Michael made a silent promise, not just to Ethan, but to himself. He wouldn't let Sarah leave. He wouldn't allow fear, his or hers, to destroy the family they had built so unexpectedly. He would find a way to show her that her place was here, with them, not as an employee or friend, but as an essential, irreplaceable and loved part of their lives. Saturday morning dawned with a surprisingly blue sky for a Boston winter. Rays of sunlight filtered through the blinds, created golden patterns on the floor of Michael's bedroom when he opened his eyes. He had slept little but felt strangely invigorated, as if the weight he had carried for the last few weeks had been partially relieved by the previous night's conversation. He got up early and prepared his own coffee, something he rarely did since Sarah had entered their lives. Sitting at the kitchen table, he mentally organized the day ahead. He had made some calls the night before, pulling some strings, as they say. Now, he just needed to wait for Ethan and Sarah to wake up. Around 9, he heard movement in his son's room. Soon, Ethan appeared in the kitchen, still in pajamas, his hair messy and his eyes slightly swollen, vestiges of the night's crying. "Good morning, champ," greeted Michael, opening his arms for a hug that the boy promptly accepted. "Did you sleep well after going back to sleep?" Ethan nodded, rubbing his eyes. "I dreamed about dinosaurs," he commented, sitting at the table. "Cool dinosaurs, not scary ones." "That's good," replied Michael, serving a glass of juice for his son. "Hey, I have a surprise for today. An adventure for the three of us, you, me, and Sarah. What do you think?" Ethan's face immediately lit up. "What kind of adventure? Are we going to the zoo or to the amusement park?" "Better," promised Michael with a mysterious smile. "But it's a secret for now. First, let's have breakfast and wait for Sarah to wake up." As if she had heard her name, Sarah appeared at the kitchen door. Unlike Ethan, she was already completely dressed and groomed, although her eyes also revealed a night of restless sleep. "Good morning," she greeted, hesitant. "Sorry for the delay. I ended up falling asleep again after the alarm." "No problem," assured Michael. "Actually, you arrived at the perfect time. I was telling Ethan about our plans for today." "Plans?" she repeated, clearly confused. "Dad said we're going on an adventure," exclaimed Ethan, the excitement overcoming any remnant of sleepiness. "The three of us." Sarah looked at Michael, a silent question in her eyes. He just smiled, winking discreetly. "Why don't you have your coffee while Ethan gets ready? I'm thinking we'll leave around 10:30 if that's good for you." Intrigued but willing to go with the flow for now, Sarah nodded and began to prepare her breakfast. Ethan, excited about the prospect of a surprise adventure, quickly gulped down his cereal and ran to get dressed. When they were alone in the kitchen, Sarah finally questioned, "What are you planning, Michael?" "A visit," he replied, enigmatically. "Something I've been thinking about for some time, actually. And don't worry, I notified Emily last night. She has a day full of studying ahead and preferred to stay." Sarah seemed to want to ask more questions, but contained herself. There was a new dynamic between them since the previous night's conversation, a kind of cautious truce, both aware that something important was about to change, but still uncertain about the exact shape of that change. At 10:30 sharp, the three of them were in the car, a spacious SUV that Michael rarely used, usually preferring the executive sedan for his work commitments. Ethan sat in the back seat, chattering animatedly about all the possible adventures that could be waiting for them. Maybe it's a camping trip or fishing. John Peter from my class went fishing with his dad last weekend and caught a hoge fish, he recounted, stretching his arms to demonstrate the probably exaggerated size of the fish. Michael and Sarah exchanged smiles through the rearview mirror, momentarily united by Ethan's childish joy. As the car advanced through the streets of Boston, leaving downtown behind, Sarah began to show more curiosity. "Are we going to Brookline?" she asked, recognizing the direction they were taking. "Almost," replied Michael. "A bit further." 20 minutes later, the car entered an elegant residential area with spacious houses protected by high walls and ornamental gates. The Brookline neighborhood, one of the most valued regions of the Boston capital, known for its privileged view of the Emerald Necklace Parks and proximity to preserved green areas. Michael finally stopped the car in front of a dark wooden gate, partially covered by a flowering vine. Through the slats, one could glimpse a well-tended garden and a two-story house with contemporary design, combining modern straight lines with rustic elements like wood and stone. "We've arrived," he announced, turning off the engine. "Who lives here?" asked Ethan, stretching his neck to better see the property. "No one for now," replied Michael, turning to look at both his son and Sarah. "This house is for sale, and I was thinking that maybe it could be our new home." The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan looked from the house to his father and back to the house, processing the information. Sarah, in turn, seemed completely astonished. "Our house?" she repeated finally, her voice almost a whisper. "Yes," confirmed Michael, maintaining a casual tone, although his heart was beating rapidly. "I thought it would be good for Ethan to have a yard where he could play, and there's a studio in the back that would be perfect for Emily to study. And—" he hesitated briefly, "and I thought all of us could use a new beginning, in a place that was really ours." Before Sarah could respond, the gate began to open. An elegant, middle-aged woman wearing a well-cut business suit appeared smiling. "Mr. Turner." "Punctual as always," she greeted, approaching the car. "We're ready for the visit, as agreed." Michael got out of the vehicle and greeted the realtor, whom he had already met days before. Then he opened the door for Sarah and Ethan. The boy immediately ran to the garden, fascinated by the decorative fountain near the main entrance. "You can enter and explore as you wish," offered the realtor. "I'll be here if you have any questions, but I'll give you space to get to know the property peacefully." The house is completely furnished for demonstration as requested. Sarah remained motionless beside the car, her eyes fixed on Michael, a mixture of confusion and something that could be hope on her face. "Shall we?" he invited, extending his hand. After a moment of hesitation, she accepted the gesture, and together they followed Ethan, who had already disappeared inside the house. The interior was impressive, spacious without being ostentatious, luxurious without being exaggerated. The environments flowed naturally from one to another, with large windows that allowed abundant entry of natural light and offered views of the meticulously maintained garden. The decoration combined contemporary pieces with some rustic items, creating a welcoming and sophisticated atmosphere. Ethan ran from one room to another, exclaiming at each new discovery. "Dad, there's a pool outside, and a space that seems perfect for a swing. Can we put a swing, can't we?" he asked, not really waiting for an answer before continuing his exploration. "And look, you can see the emerald necklace from here." Michael observed Sarah as she walked silently through the space, gently running her fingers over the furniture, stopping to admire architectural details, opening and closing cabinet doors as if testing their quality. On the second floor they found the master suite, a spacious bedroom with a private balcony that offered a panoramic view of the city. Next to it, there were two smaller bedrooms, one of them decorated as a children's room with a space theme, planets, stars, and rockets on the walls. "Ethan would love this," commented Sarah, finally breaking her silence. "He's been fascinated by astronomy lately." "I know," replied Michael, smiling, "since you took him to that exhibition at the Museum of Science." They continued the exploration, going down again to see the back of the property. Besides the pool that Ethan had mentioned, there was a barbecue area, a small orchard with fruit trees, and, separated from the main house, an independent studio with its own bathroom. The space that Michael had mentioned would be perfect for Emily. Throughout the time, Ethan ran from one side to the other, imagining out loud what it would be like to live there, where he would put his toys, how it would be to swim in the pool every day if they could finally have a dog. And this room could be Emily's when she wasn't in the studio. And here we could have family movie nights. And look, there's a perfect space for a telescope. The boy's excitement was contagious, but Sarah maintained a cautious expression, as if afraid to let herself be carried away by enthusiasm, only to be disappointed later. When they completed the tour, the realtor discreetly informed them that she would be in the garden if they needed her. Ethan asked permission to explore the orchard, leaving Michael and Sarah alone in the spacious living room. "What do you think?" Michael finally asked. Sarah sighed, sitting on one of the sofas. "It's an incredible place, Michael. Any family would be happy here." "But," he encouraged, noticing the hesitation in her voice. "But I don't understand what this means," she replied, looking him directly in the eyes. "This house, what exactly are you proposing?" Michael sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "I'm proposing a new beginning for all of us." "As a family?" she asked directly. "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "As a family. And what would that mean in practice? Would I continue as—" "What? The housekeeper who lives in the house? Ethan's nanny? The mother of his friend?" Michael realized it was time for truth, the moment to clearly define what they had both avoided naming. "No, Sarah," he replied firmly. "You would be my partner. The person with whom I want to build a life. The woman for whom I—" He hesitated briefly, then continued, letting the words flow naturally. "The woman for whom I'm falling in love a little more each day." The silence that followed seemed to vibrate with the intensity of the confession. Sarah stared at him, eyes wide, as if she didn't completely trust what she had just heard. "You're falling in love with me?" she repeated, her voice almost inaudible. "I am," he confirmed, feeling a weight being removed from his shoulders with the admission. "Actually, I think I've been in love for some time. I was just afraid to admit it, afraid to risk, afraid to lose what we already had." Sarah lowered her eyes, processing the words. "Michael, our worlds are so different. You're a CEO, owner of a technology company, accustomed to luxury and privileges. I'm a former teacher from a small town in Georgia who came to work as a cleaning lady to support my daughter." "So what?" he asked, with a simplicity that surprised her. "What matters is who we are, not where we come from or how much money we have. And you, Sarah Miller, are the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. Intelligent, strong, dedicated, loving. The kind of person who makes others want to be better just by being near her. The kind of person who made me want to be better." Tears began to form in her eyes. "I'm so afraid, Michael. Afraid of not being enough, of not fitting into your world." "It's not about fitting into my world or me fitting into yours," he replied, gently taking her hands. "It's about creating our own world together. This house could be the beginning of that. A place that's neither my apartment in the Berkshire building nor your former home in Macon. A new place for a new life. And the people, the comments, the looks? To hell with them," he replied with a vehemence that made her smile through the tears. "If I've learned anything in the last few months, it's that other people's opinions are worth much less than our family's happiness. And if someone is bothered by our happiness, well, that's their problem, not ours." Sarah observed him for a long moment, as if trying to find any sign of doubt or hesitation in his eyes. She found none. "And the job offer in Chicago?" she asked, almost in a whisper. "It's your choice," he replied honestly. "It will always be your choice. I don't want you to stay out of obligation or because you feel pressured. I want you to stay because you want to, because you believe we can build something special together. And if you decide you need to go, we'll find a way to make it work." "But," he hesitated, allowing himself to show vulnerability, "but I really hope you choose to stay." Before Sarah could respond, they heard footsteps in the room. Ethan burst into the living room, carrying a fruit he had just picked in the orchard. "Look what I found. A guava. Can we plant more fruit trees? Maybe a mango tree or a jabuticaba? And can I have a dog here? Please say yes." Michael and Sarah exchanged a look, an involuntary smile appearing on both faces at the boy's enthusiasm. "What do you think, Sarah?" asked Michael, passing the decision to her. "Do you think we can have a dog?" Ethan immediately turned to Sarah, his eyes pleading. "Please, Mom, I promise I'll take care of him, feed him, take him for walks, everything." The natural use of the word mom didn't go unnoticed by either adult. This time, however, there was no embarrassment, no hasty correction. Just a moment of silent recognition of the truth they all already knew. Sarah looked at Ethan, then at Michael, and finally at the house around them. Spacious, bright, welcoming. A place where they could create memories, build a life, be a family without restrictions or definitions imposed by others. "I think," she replied finally, her voice firm despite the tears that still shone in her eyes, "that a dog would be perfect for this house. Our house." Ethan's face lit up with a radiant smile. "Does that mean we're going to move here? All of us? You too, right, Mum?" "Yes, honey," confirmed Sarah, opening her arms to receive the boy's enthusiastic hug. "All of us." Over Ethan's head, her eyes met Michael's. There was no more fear in them, only certainty, and something more, something he recognized, because it exactly reflected what he felt. Love. Simple as that. Not the instant love of fairy tales, but the kind of love that grows slowly, nourished by small moments, by shared challenges, by conscious choices made day after day. During a visit to a property in Brookline, Michael finally verbalized what he had felt since the early morning when he returned from his trip. He wanted to build a new family, one where the title of father was practiced and not just inherited, where "my daughter" was no longer just a reminder of what he had lost, but the living expression of what he decided to rebuild. And there, in that bright house in Brookline, with Ethan between them and the future opening ahead, that's exactly what they were doing. Rebuilding, starting over, consciously choosing to be a family. 3 months later, on a sunny spring morning, moving trucks parked in front of the Berkshire building. Furniture was carefully packed, boxes identified, memories selected to accompany them on the new journey. Emily, who had just been accepted in first place to medical school, an achievement she attributed to everyone's support, supervised the organization of her books, enthusiastic about the studio that would be exclusively hers in the new house. Ethan ran from one side to the other, more concerned with his new friend, a caramel-colored mutt adopted from a shelter named Einstein, than with his own belongings. Sarah, wearing a simple but elegant ring that Michael had given her the week before, not as a formal marriage proposal, but as a symbol of the commitment they had made to each other, organized the kitchen of the new house, deciding where each utensil would go. And Michael, observing the movement with a serene smile, reflected on how life could be surprising. 3 years ago, after Rebecca's departure, he had imagined that his heart would never open again, that his focus would be only work and raising Ethan in the best possible way, even if at an emotional distance. Now there he was, in the middle of moving to a new house, with an expanded family, a dog, and a heart so full of love that sometimes it seemed it wouldn't fit in his chest. "What are you thinking about?" asked Sarah, approaching him amid the organized confusion of the move. "About how we got here," he replied, honestly. "About how one early morning, an unexpected return from a trip completely changed the course of our lives." Sarah smiled, that smile he had learned to love, serene, genuine, illuminating her entire face. "Do you believe in destiny, Michael Turner?" "I didn't used to believe," he replied, gently pulling her close, "but I'm starting to change my mind." Ethan appeared running, Einstein at his heels, interrupting the moment with his infinite energy. "Mom, Dad, let's go. I want to show my new room to John Peter. He said he'll visit me as soon as we finish moving." "We're coming, son," assured Michael, exchanging a complicit look with Sarah. As they walked together toward the elevator, for the last time as residents of the Berkshire building, Michael was certain they were making the right choice, not because the new house was bigger or more beautiful, or because the neighborhood was more prestigious, but because, for the first time in a long time, the word home meant to him not just a physical place, but a feeling. The feeling of belonging, of being exactly where he should be, with the people with whom he should be. The feeling of, finally, being home.